Just as stress reveals the flaws in metal or in architecture, so the stress of our time reveals the flaws in our personal self-discipline. As conditions drift along from year to year within a fairly well-regulated pattern, the individual may find himself able to maintain a reasonable degree of self-control. But as tensions increase, and of course today we are in a particularly stressful period, as these tensions build up around us and within us, it is very difficult to maintain a placid disposition. Some experts, in fact, feel that we should not. That when a person is under exceptional provocation, he should react as dramatically as his endocrine support will permit. Actually, all we have been able to demonstrate is that frequent outbreaks of temperament will, in the course of years, destroy endocrine support. The person finds that he develops a chronic fatigue situation. He is simply wasting too much energy. And nature did not intend him to be so wasteful. Nature prepares certain defenses against emergencies, but no structure created by nature or man can survive perpetual emergency. The only answer seems to be that we must adjust our own thinking to a more reasonable understanding of our problems. This is not a time in which most persons are reasonable. They try to be, but for the most part, they react instinctively and inevitably to the irritations around them. So this morning we want to try to see if we can find some simple rules to help to cope with the situation. Obviously, the basic principle involved is that we can carry with dignity situations if we are bigger than these situations. If they are more powerful than we are, however, we cannot carry them without unusual tension. In order to be larger than problems, we have to understand through problems. We have to build some form of rational support that can sustain us under sudden critical pressure situations. In other words, we cannot always simply rationalize. The mental and emotional reflexes are too rapid for us. We only get around to thinking through the situation long after it has occurred and the damage has been done. At the moment, we react to impulse. We feel a certain way, and it becomes an almost automatic certainty that we will express ourselves according to these feelings. To be larger than a problem consequently means that we have to have resources within our own natures that are sufficient to sustain us against the ordinary situations of living. We will have some help in great emergencies, but we cannot waste this help, nor call upon it when it is not really necessary. The individual is by nature inclined to be irritable. Animals are easily irritated. Most forms of life react violently to all forms of attack or hazard or danger or threat. Man, however, has been equipped to be a little nobler than the beasts. And in order to live a better life than that of the animal world, he has to make use of his innate capacities. The irritable person today, if you go into the story of his life, is usually the victim of a long sequence of undigested occurrences. He has never at any time been able to really see through the network of his own character complexities. He will have many excuses and explanations for his attitudes. One of the most common is that he has taken about all he can take, and that the moment for rebellion is at hand. He first expressed himself in this way, though not perhaps so articulately, when he had the first outbreak of summer complaint in his crib. He just could not take any more of it. He had further problems if he grew up in a family with other children. Nearly always, this community existence results in the rise of one strong individual who finds that they can bully the rest of the relatives. This leads those who are not the strong one to build constant resentments against situations. Later, the person going out into society makes the discovery that the world is not exactly what he thought it was going to be or hoped it would be. He finds, for example, that he is not very important as an individual in modern society. People will not cater to him. And if his family has spoiled him, the shock is still worse. Also, we observe that children who are educated in private schools, especially of a religious nature, may come out into the practical problems of living badly equipped for a world that is not obviously and immediately controlled by divine providence. The individual expected to find deity as the supreme ruler of human attitudes. This expectancy was sadly disappointed. As we go along, we have all kinds of pressures. And if we are naturally sensitive, we react in excessive ways to these pressures. The more excessively we react, the more inevitably the pressures increase. The moment we are unable to adjust satisfactorily in our own lives, we inevitably annoy other people, whether we know it or not. So the individual who is himself irritated is also irritating other people. We do not like to pause and consider this, or we feel that other people should be more patient with us than we have ever been willing to be patient with them. When we are irritated, it is of just cause. When other people do not like us, it is misunderstanding or persecution. In the real examination of the situation, we know that some individuals become hypersensitive. They develop the kind of attitude in which almost anything that happens offends or hurts them. Situations that another individual would pass over without even a moment of discomfort will bring these hypersensitive souls to the most extreme pain. The person must look inside of himself, therefore, to discover whether or not he is a sensitive plant. If everything that happens acts upon him as an early frost upon his own purposes, then he has to recognize that for reasons obviously sufficient, nature has tossed us into a melting pot of other people's temperaments and expects us to do something about it. Well, there's always been one formula to solve this. Being tossed into this dilemma, it becomes our inevitable duty to change everybody else. Now, this is a beautiful thought, but a very, very frustrating one. We discover that after spending the best years of our lives changing other people, a new generation of impossibles has grown up that we have been unable to reach. There will always be someone come into the world somewhere who cannot feel the benevolent effects of our advice. And so the world goes on. And the unhappy person becomes more and more unhappy. Now, one of the very sad points of this is that the unhappy person might be right. That is a very hard one to understand. It may well be that the person who feels that things have been a little too difficult for him is in reasonable ways right. There are changes we all know should occur in society. We know that this world is not nearly as friendly and kindly and happy as it ought to be. And with this utopian instinct within ourselves comes sometimes a kind of messianic complex. We decide there's a great work to be done, so we go out and try and do it and become even more immediately hurt. The world does not want our help. The world does not want us to continually tell other people what is wrong with them. This is the most useless and thankless task on earth. Now, there are some very resolute souls who say it may be useless, I may end up a martyr to it, but it is my duty to tell other people what is wrong with them. It is my duty to run my children's lives because my children are not running their own as I know they should be run. This is a good way to become a rejected parent. We may be right in many things, but even in rightness, we cannot always attain our own purposes. For the reformer is taking a stand. He is taking it for granted that he can change another person. Now, it is possible where information is bestowed that we can help people. We can help people by giving them more general knowledge about their problem. We can help them by suggesting and recommending certain possible areas in which they can find better information by which to conduct their lives. But we can never achieve any improvement through the process of nagging. I had someone in not long ago for an interview who said that they were very unhappy because their children said they were nagging. And they assured me that they had never nagged once in their lives. This was a remarkable situation. I was almost going to ask for the autograph. But the fact of the matter was that they had never nagged, but they had insisted on running all of the children's lives. This was not nagging. This was paternal responsibility thoroughly enforced. It was the right of the older person to be not only listened to, but obeyed. It was the right of the parent who claimed to know more to guide the children through all of the difficulties of their own families and their own children as they came along. The unfortunate situation was that the person who was administering this right had failed utterly in 3 marriages. They had been unable to control their own lives. They had been unable to put into action the exact advice they were communicating to their children. Theoretically, the advice was correct. It could have been beautifully painted, surrounded by violets, and hung on the wall. It was true, in principle. But the person who gave it had never been able to live it, had never really given very much thought to living it. It was something that was good, substantial, and many persons think they are living it, whether they are or not. So this problem of irritation must always go back to the person himself in some way. Irritation is a habit. Once it develops, it will be permitted to gradually take over the general ruling of the life. An irritated person nearly always has a long background historically and biographically for his situation. He belongs to a culture in which irritation has been the keynote since the beginning. It is this lack of self-control, this lack of insight, this lack of patience, this lack of charity, which has written Western history and has written it in blood. The problem has never been that the individual learned to be something. His problem always was to enforce his own unfinishedness upon everyone else. Whatever he wanted, he was entitled to. And this is enough, of course, to make trouble for a whole community. Furthermore, the person comes usually from a poorly adjusted family. A family in which there was very little closeness. There was very little honorable example of unselfishness, leading to the preservation of larger values. The family was bickering. The parents were not really close. One was dominating and the other was dominated. Patience was a continuous process of accepting unfairness. The child growing up in this kind of an environment was also usually required to take sides at an early period of life. He had to care most for those that his parents cared most for, and to regard as unsuitable that which the parents declared to be unsuitable. In older generations, feuds built upon rejected members of families dominated households for 3, 4, or 5 generations. Thus, the young person coming into this world found very little but bickering. And as he goes on through life, he finds still very little but mutual dissatisfactions, antagonisms, and antipathies. Religion, which was presumed to instruct him in forgiveness, did not achieve its purpose because the person did not have the experience within himself of the dignity and rewardingness of forgiveness. He just did not understand. So as we come down through the ages, we find that human beings have gradually built the crises in their personal lives and in their communities which they suffer from today. We are still living in traditional antagonisms. Today, all over the earth, nations are at war or close to the brink of war, simply because they cannot forget history, because they cannot forget that they had an enemy in another nation 10 centuries ago. These old feuds must be fought to the bitter end. Now, it is not so true today that family feuds are long-lived. Family unities have been so broken up, and individualization has advanced to such a degree that the old traditional antagonisms do not have as great strength, particularly in our Western life. In other parts of the world, they are still very powerful. But here, the antagonisms generally arise within the lifetime of the person. But what he does not realize is that they exist because of endowments within himself, which are hereditary or psychological. We also can take the point of view, of course, of the Eastern philosopher, who tells us that we are born into this world only because of what is wrong with us. If such is true, and it might well be from general appearances, then we have a very serious consideration. The individual is not here because of what he knows, but because of what he does not know. He is not here to merely permit his virtues to shine upon a waiting world. He is here because he is nursing a group of vices. And he will have to come back here, according to Buddhism, until he gets through nursing these vices, until he achieves the complete internal integration of his own nature. Thus, we are all here in common because of our mistakes. And it is quite obvious as we go along through years that we still have capacity to make magnificent mistakes. We can do things very badly even when we are trying desperately to do them well. In fact, the desperate effort is almost always going to be rewarded with disaster, because we were not intended to make desperate efforts. We were intended to think things through, experience them wisely, and live accordingly. If you, therefore, observe in your own nature that you are rather quick to observe the faults in others, and that when reminded of this, you take refuge in the realization that you have been seriously offended, not only on this particular occasion, but down through the years, that your problem really arises perhaps through too much scar tissue in your own psyche. As one person said to me, they had just suffered beyond understanding. They just could not take any more. The only thing that seemed to help at all was to get mad. Of course, anger didn't solve anything. It never does. But it is to let out steam, to get rid of pressure, which otherwise, it seems, would tear the person apart. Irritation, then classically defined in the thinking of our day, is a safety valve against mounting pressure. The person either has to find some outlet, a quick emotional outlet, or else, under some conditions, they will simply surge inside to the point of hysteria. This outlet under pressure seems as though it should be of no great concern to other people. They should learn to accept our own peculiarities as we must accept theirs. But this common acceptance is uncommon. The individual who himself is also bearing a heavy load of pressures, most of which other people do not appreciate or understand, suddenly is the victim of an unfair judgment, or perhaps even a fair one, bitterly bestowed. This becomes a little too much for the disturbed individual, and he begins to let out pressure. At the present time, the 3.5 billion human beings making up the world's population seem to be all letting off pressure at once. Everyone has less self-control than they seemed to possess a few years ago. Actually, this is not the fact of the matter. They do not have less self-control because this does not change. They only seem to have less. What actually is happening is more self-control is being demanded of them, and they are not making any real substantial effort to meet the challenge. The rationalization of the problem is merely a debating mechanism. We can sit down and reason these things out. We can, in the course of an hour or two of quiet thoughtfulness in an appropriate situation, realize what we should do and how we should do it. We can talk ourselves into this, just as though someone else was speaking to us. But then comes the moment when we must apply this rationalization, and we find that it does not hold, that in the moment of emergency we forget all about it and react according to this mysterious network of sympathetic nervous structures which we have within the body. So we do not react wisely, even though we may be able to intellectually see and understand the proper courses of action. This is because we do not have support in the area of impulse for rationalization. The emotions of man are far more powerful than his mind, and the emotions of man have never been well educated. We have marvelous universities for the training of the mind. We have magnificent institutions where individuals are given skills in arts and sciences, but their emotions are completely undeveloped, unmatured, undisciplined. And as a result of that, we are now having all kinds of riots on campuses. All through the ages, man has realized that mind helped him to master other people, helped him to master nature, to direct and control destiny, and that mind also provided him with the skill for a successful career. As the average person regarded success as actually more important than happiness, and has always been willing to sacrifice peace of mind for material accumulation. We have come to the condition now in which the mind can help the average person to some type of distinguished career, but the emotional nature is simply uneducated. The emotional nature is back somewhere in the prehistoric world. And whereas rationally we can accomplish a great deal, the moment our emotions are stirred, especially negative, we can turn into a lynch mob. We can turn upon those who have been best to us and tear them apart. And where mental disease begins to show itself, where the individual begins to lose mental coordination, he is most certainly going to turn with the bitterest hatred upon those who are taking care of him, who love him, worried about him, and are dying of a broken heart because of his condition. These are the people he will hate. He will do so because, basically, he has never educated his emotional life even before mental difficulty arose. It is not common, by the way, to find an individual who has a deep insight into life become this hateful type, even under senility or mental disease. He generally will become rather childlike, may lose the control of faculties, but if hate has never been in him, and even insanity will not bring hate out of him. The difficulty is to find a person in whom there is no hate, and this is very rare. In the problem, then, that we are concerned with now, the individual must step in and do something to take care of himself if he wishes to retain his nervous and emotional equilibrium. He must recognize the need to mature his own feelings, not merely be the victim of them, but must have them available as a means of enriching life and not as pressure to destroy life. We know that in the educational world, there has been a reaching out toward this through the development of what have been termed the humanities. Efforts have been made to refine the life by creating appreciation for beauty, by causing the person to gain a new respect for non-commercial activities. The importance of beautifying life is just as real as the importance of establishing great cities, factories, and institutions. Because we have not been able to economically demonstrate the importance of self-control, we do not have as much of it as we should have. Yet even in economics, this need for self-control is very present. What we do not always recognize is why a career suddenly is blasted. The man in some executive position who loses his job does not know why he has lost it in many cases. When it comes to simply telling a man to his face that he is unpleasant, that he is emotionally immature, this is something that most employers or personnel managers do not feel necessary. The man is simply laid off. This, of course, to him is utterly unjust. He does not know why he has been the victim of this action. Usually he will blame it upon some other cause. He will insist that management has some pet that it wishes to put in his place. He insists that he has been the victim of an office conspiracy, that his virtues are not appreciated, that his abilities have not been recognized. So he goes out and raises a beard and becomes a beatnik. He never realizes the truth, that his difficulty lies in his own lack of integration. Because even in industry, very few organizations are really anxious to get rid of valuable people. These people, however, may overvalue themselves. And this may not have to do with their skills. They may be thoroughly equipped for their work, but if their disposition is impossible, they are going to fail. How then can we go after a little bit of this? We have to grasp the basic situation that emotional control brought about by what you might term mental tyranny over emotion is worthless. It is very much like over punishment or wrong punishment of children. it does not accomplish its purpose. The individual simply cannot, by the sheer exercise of will, change from an irritable individual to a charming one. It just will not operate. In order to effect this change, the person has to actually grow in some way. Ignorance is not overcome by brute force. It is overcome only by enlightenment. And these irritable people suffer from a certain kind of emotional ignorance. They therefore must enlighten this area of their lives by schooling it, by bestowing knowledge upon it according to a plan, a purpose, a policy. And the person himself must realize that what he is doing is important. He must recognize that success or failure in every area of his life, his own peace of mind, his peace of heart, his ability to continue every day in a comfortable, pleasant condition of thought and emotion, all this depends upon his ability to control and direct himself. Some religions contribute a good deal to this procedure, and those born in the religion have certain natural benefits. But unfortunately, religion is more inclined to cause the individual to develop patience toward others than to correct himself. Religion usually emphasizes the importance of understanding other people, of being kind to them, of turning the other cheek. But the question has never been quite solved as to how the fight started in the first place when this problem of turning the other cheek arises. Who hit who first? This is not clearly indicated. So we have to go a little deeper into the problem than this. Religions that have been most fortunate in helping people to a serene life are those which were built upon graciousness rather than those which are built upon sin. A person who must be constantly defending himself from error, from the cradle to the grave, really has no way of knowing what the errors are. Therefore, he defends himself against everything and everyone and becomes utterly defensive. In a true, properly balanced spiritual insight, the individual has to gain an awareness in his own life of value, of certain values to be understood. This awareness cannot be merely theoretical, but every person has to make some decisions which involve theoretical elements. A person who has lived uncomfortably and unpleasantly for half a lifetime may decide that something must be done about it, that there is no reason to continue and ruin the other half of life. This means a recognition, and unless this recognition arises within the person, there is really no way in which the desired end can be achieved. Recognition may arise from the example of other persons, which stimulate in us a desire to, in some way, copy their good characteristics. This new sense of possibility may arise from the study of arts or sciences, or the consideration of the impersonal lives of the great who have preceded us. We may be led to it by almost any kind of inward realization. But one thing is certain. We must finally decide that we can improve, we should improve, and we must improve. And that the situation means that we must change ourselves. Until we come to this final conclusion, which too often arises only on the deathbed, we cannot meet this challenge. We have to leave it to the mill of the gods to grind out the solution in some future time. If, however, there gradually dawns upon us that there are better ways of living than we are using, that there are ways in which we can actually enlarge our own insight, we can be more liberal, more tolerant, more patient, more kindly, less critical, less condemnatory, then we begin to follow the most approved philosophic technique. And that is not over-indoctrination. We do not settle down and try to run the emotional gamut of man through a computer to see what comes out. We do not make long-range plans that we are going to do this and we are going to do that, for such plans are only made to be broken. What we are really concerned with, once the resolution is set within ourselves, is to watch quietly the world around us, getting the tension out of it for a little while. We will try to see a little further into the stone wall than our neighbor does. We must begin to observe through our own experiences and through our own observations the solutions to our problems. One of the first observations that will naturally come to us will be the habits of people around us, the habits and policies and practices of our neighbors. For a little larger look at things, we can read the morning paper, which is a dismal but informing document sometimes, depending upon what we shed upon it in the term of our own light. Very often we lay it down with disgust simply because we have not been able to bring our own faculties to bear upon it in the very serious and careful consideration of the facts of existence. One of the things that a person must do who wants to get a better emotional adjustment with life is to learn what the facts are. Because once we know the facts, life is no longer a sequence of disillusioning, miserable, unexpected difficulties. The moment we begin to know more about life, we realize that many of our attacks upon it are useless and arise from our ignorance rather than from our insight. But if we are not actually seeking to become better, we see only the negative patterns in the world in which we live. So we start in by very quietly re-evaluating those who are close to us or with whom we must have associations. Re-evaluating history. Re-evaluating our own place in life. Trying to discover both our own largeness and our own smallness. Never overlooking the smallness. Constantly striving to find out the truth of these matters, for it is the truth and the truth alone that will make us free. The individual who has a true insight expects no more than can be expected, cannot be surprised by other people, nor can he be hurt or distressed when those inevitable things happen, which are the only things that can happen under the circumstances. One way I think that helps a great deal to get past some of this irritation is to realize that not only do we misrepresent ourselves practically every moment of our daily lives, but other people also misrepresent themselves. That the person inhabiting a body is usually in an uncomfortable relationship with that body. The body is not any more comfortable than clothes that fit poorly. The individual, therefore, does not always express himself correctly. We do not always express ourselves correctly. Very often we will not even wait to let the other person express himself before we convict him of something. So we have to get a little tolerance in this, and I know a very gorgeous platitude bearing on this subject, which has advantages if people want to think about it. An old gentleman I knew years ago who gave about 80 years to trying to help other people once said that he was convinced that everyone was doing the best he could for what he is. It's the last part of it you have to be thoughtful about. We cannot expect people to be better than they are. We cannot demand of them an insight they do not possess. But if we are careful and thoughtful in studying other people, we will realize that most persons do live up to their own insight. The trouble is, it is not strong enough. It is not a complete enough insight, and binds most people to little things, little patterns of commonplace incidents. This insight is not strong enough to result in great dedications to truth. Our own insight is not, in most cases. Therefore, we are doing the best we can for what we are. And the trick of the matter is to find out how this state of are can be increased, that we can become better. So betterness will be our natural condition. No one in his right mind at all can completely deny experience. That is, particularly the experiences which occur to him. Most great philosophies of man's development have been philosophies of experience. The person has learned through the very process of trial and error. If, therefore, we want the most valid testimony of a fact that there is, this testimony is not to be found by raising our voices. It is not the result of talking louder than someone else, or faster, or using longer words. The actual source of real enlightenment is the ability to accept the meaning of experience. As the person is most likely to come to truth-seeking after a life of rather checkered experiences, he has a wonderful textbook available to him in himself if he wants to use it. That which nature denies, the individual is not going to accomplish. That which nature demands, the individual cannot afford to ignore. There is every reason to assume under the laws of existence as we know them, that it is possible for human beings to live together in peace. It is possible. Man has been so constituted that this can be done, but it is not commonly noted. It is also perfectly possible that in a family, the members of that family can live together in concord. Some families do. This is a final proof that it can be done. It is true that everyone is not going to be a great artist like Leonardo or a great musician like Bach. But that nature can produce great artists and great musicians is obvious. That nature has produced great human souls is also obvious. And these great human souls have not, in most instances, been the products of exceedingly fortunate generations, or pressureless times, or unusually smug surroundings. Most of these souls have struggled to their light by dedication, and have achieved that which was most important to them, enlightenment. Thus it can be done. Furthermore, in the life of most people, great accomplishment is not immediately required. It is not necessary that the average person become a saint overnight. The only thing that is necessary is that the person shall slowly, quietly, wisely grow, and by so doing gradually overcome the negative factors which afflict them. Experience will be our greatest guide, if we have sense enough and strength enough to follow its instruction. It also gives us the great incentives. The person can deny the experience, but he cannot really convince himself of his own denial. And if he succeeds in blocking his own intelligence completely, a new and similar experience will arise in the near future, and these experiences will continue until they are accepted. Man cannot escape this. By experience, we can estimate the validity of our own attitudes. We can say to ourselves, I have had a sharp temper all my life. What has it profited me? What have I achieved in the terms of peace of mind, peace of soul, contentment? What has come to me in form of better friendships, a closer understanding, deeper sympathies as the result of my having a bad temper? And if we look through the situation, the only apparent constructive result that is obtainable at all is that the person may have succeeded in bullying other people into silence. But these other people privately resent him. He has practically no true friends. And along one of these days will come his doctor. And his doctor will say to him, what have you done to yourself? You have destroyed your own life. You've destroyed your own health. You have thrown yourself open to infirmities which arise from those who do not control their own emotions. So the person who has tried this course of keeping on with his bitternesses and his antagonisms and his condemnations, this person has actually nothing to show for it. He has perhaps a little wealth, which his relatives are waiting for as soon as he dies. He has some small achievement in the community, which he has had to buy. He has perhaps a few satellites moving about him, weak persons whom he can dominate, who loathe him, but find it profitable to cater to him. Who wants this as the reward of a lifetime? Those who want it will have it. But even these people come gradually to the moment of awaking. Someday they do sit down and add up the various assets and liabilities and find themselves bankrupt. Thus, if you really will look through your own patterns and pick out those characteristics which you know are not especially desirable, but about which you have not felt you could do anything, you may, by building a clearer insight of the effect of these factors on your daily life, have a renewed determination to do something about it. Very few persons really want to be miserable. If they have reached this stage of introversion and have become completely psychologically unsettled, probably there is not too much that can be done about it. But take the case of the neurotic, the hypochondriac, the individual with the persecution complex, the martyr complex, or the Napoleonic complex. And you find that all these sick people, these persons who you realize have wasted and destroyed their lives, all of these persons began by being what you might call irritable. They all began with intolerances of some kind. They were all jealous or bitter, or allowed themselves to build great superstructures upon the disasters of personal life. They have taken a bad childhood and an unfortunate marriage, or it has gradually changed them into an impossible person. No one in their right minds wants this to happen to them. But somewhere along the way, they have to sit down and think it through, using the practical experiences of their own living to justify the need for improvement. You can read 50 books on it. You can go to all the analysts in the country. But you cannot get the certainty of your mistake from these outside sources, and you can keep right on believing that everyone misunderstands you. But when you sit down with yourself and go back over your life honestly, you can pretty well tell when you were right and when you were wrong. And when things did not come out the way you wanted them to, that there was probably a reason why they did not. You can also realize how some of the advice you gave other people worked out badly for them, something we are very quick to forget under normal conditions. So going back, we can see certain things. And among the things that we can see is that in most cases, our judgments, our attitudes have been too hasty. We have not allowed ourselves to contemplate quietly the full meaning of situations. Someone says something, at the moment we do not care whether it is true or not. We object. If we thought it through, we might not be too happy about it, but we can say it was just. And Socrates, of course, has given us an excellent example for that, because he says that the true friend is the person who will quietly tell us what is wrong And the enemy is the individual who agrees with us. This is the opposite to our thinking. But actually, if we can quietly take things and think them through, we will sometimes be very grateful instead of angry. But if we have already been angry and the situation is at loose ends, our gratitude will come too late to be of any effect. Furthermore, if we have made our decision audibly, even though it was wrong, our personal sense of pride will make it very difficult for us to reverse the decision. To do so, we must acknowledge error, and most people rather die than do that. But the knowledge of the error is thrust upon them inevitably. So begin working with yourself to find out what experience that cannot be denied, that is not the result of some thundering edict from on high, but is just the inevitable result of living. This experience teaches us nearly everything that we need to know. And the wise men of old, particularly the small-town wise men of this country 100 years ago, just common people, the blacksmith, the little country storekeeper, the small-town minister, these persons with very little formal knowledge were tremendous forces in maintaining law and order. They had the homespun, simple philosophy based upon trying to earn what you get and accepting what you have earned, whether you are happy about it or not. If you will, therefore, actually consider, you can say to yourself, with a little thought, almost all irritation, perhaps all of it, is waste. It is loss. It is completely false to the proper expenditures of energy. When something arises about which the average person becomes irritated, the wise person becomes thoughtful. Now, there's a great deal of difference between irritation and thoughtfulness. Thoughtfulness does not require an immediate condemnation of something. Thoughtfulness perhaps can be overdone. It may lead sometimes to lack of action. But with the really thoughtful person, there is nearly always also a quiet strength. The thoughtful person, because he thinks things through, also has principles. And when the emergencies do arise, he will quietly do that which he believes to be right. And he will believe things to be right which are a little closer to real rightness than the impulsive, agitated, nervous, irritable individual. If then we want to get at this in the most simple possible manner, let's assume that where irritating situations arise, that first of all we take a breather. Instead of snapping back, instead of suddenly feeling the welling up within ourselves of an uncontrollable resentment, let us put one curb on it. Go off in a corner somewhere and sit down. Keep quiet. Go for a walk. Retire from the scene, neither defeated nor victorious, until you've had a chance to relax and put the values together. With one stroke of an angry arm, you can break a priceless treasure that has been guarded and loved by people for 1,000 years. With one stupid remark, you can destroy a home which might otherwise serve to enrich and ennoble the lives of its members. Therefore, the first thing you have to do is mentally and physically learn to sit on your hands. Do not do anything until you can think through what is right. And as you may not be able to completely control this attitude in the presence of the person who perhaps will continue to irritate you or force you further, gracefully retire. Get out of the way of the situation. Refuse to commit yourself. Refuse to agree with that which appears to be negative. And begin to see, if you can, the other side of the thing. Try to think through for yourself what information the other person is working from. Was he working from the same impulses that perhaps have too often guided you? Did he intentionally or subconsciously see only bad and overlook all good? Is he asking you to do the same thing? Is he trying to force you to do the same thing by stimulating your negative emotions? Perhaps he does not know that he is doing this, but he may still subconsciously be interested in only one thing, namely that you hate what he hates. If this is his purpose is false. And if you go off quietly by yourself, you can think this through. So the breather is very, very important. Any attitude that may affect your life even for an hour is worth 5 minutes of silence. The experience of those who have worked with this type of thing, we've had some people who were willing to accept this pattern to work from, has been that if they went out and quietly contemplated the matter for 5 minutes, they never came back. The argument was not worth it. It became obvious to them that they were not going to change the other person who wanted to believe what he believed. It was obvious that this other person had no right to force his attitude on them. It was a lost cause. The only possible solution would be, and might be quite proper, is to quietly say, no, I do not agree with this. I do not think it is this way. I do not have the necessary evidence. I cannot accept somebody else's statement about a third person. Then think it as through as carefully as you can. Try to think about the evidence that this person has advanced. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps this other thing they are talking about, or this other person, is wrong. But think it all through very carefully, and come to the conclusion that is most valuable to life. If under those conditions you were a delegate at the United Nations trying to prevent a war, what would you do? And you can have just as bitter a war in a small family group. The only answer to the problem of war is patience. To gradually try to understand other people and help them to understand you. And this is the program that nearly always will win in cases of irritation. If your natural instinct is to try to understand the other person, this does not mean that you will be oblivious to his faults, but you will know why he has them. You will try to realize the circumstances that has led up to his attitude. You will realize that he has an attitude, and that this attitude may be real or unreal. Very often is largely unreal. And over this attitude of his, which has done him no good, you see no particular reason why you should argue and debate and compound the felony. The beginning of the good disposition, therefore, is this instinctive desire to wish or hope that a person under suspicion is doing the right thing rather than the wrong thing. It is an impulse. The impulse to charity rather than the impulse to condemn. Now, this impulse may not always be supported either. You may find out later that the person did do the thing which they have been accused of doing. Even then, however, your primary attitude of charity was right, because your charity has to be forced upon what you know, not upon hearsay, nor can it arise from any natural antagonisms you may have, so that charity represents the person withholding judgment until all the facts are in. If people would do this, it would save a great deal of irritation. It would also save a great deal of irritation not to attempt to fight through problems in which there is no possibility of a winner. When we argue the more abstract principles of life, we cannot win. We can only believe. That which we believe to us is important. Let us never forget that what other people believe is also important. And the practice of going around passing judgments because of a peculiar sense of our own rightness and the unrightness of everyone else is one of the great causes of irritation. We make people rise against us when we assail them. And we really have no right to assail them unless their conduct is such that it is obviously dangerous to society. We have no right to say that an individual should belong to a certain sect, or like him better or less because he does not belong to that sect. The problem again goes back to his need, not our need. And much irritation arises from trying to put ourselves in other people's shoes, or put them in our shoes. We will hear people say, well, if I was you, I wouldn't do it that way. That is perfectly correct. If the individual actually was someone else, who knows what he would do? He does what he does because he is what he is. If he was something else, he probably wouldn't do what he does. Nor can we say to an individual, had I your life to live, I could have lived it more wisely. The reason being we did not have his life to live, and the whole parallel is absurd. Why try it? Why not realize that our little problems that we have never solved have arisen from the life that we live? His unsolved problems from the life that he lived. Perhaps if we got together in a friendly way, we could be of a little mutual assistance to each other if both wanted. Otherwise, we are simply dogmatizing on situations we could not possibly properly understand. All this problem of irritation can arise, or much of it can arise, from a certain type of egotism. This egotism is this internal conviction that we have that we are uniquely right. And if we have never been really civilized, this instinct can become terribly aggressive. If we have never been forced, usually by love or friendship or responsibility or duty, to recognize that we must share life, that other people have rights to their dreams and their hopes also. If we've never been tempered by the flame of experience, this egotism can cause us to be tremendously opinionated. And of course, if we find that we have this peculiar sense of infallibility in us that causes us to feel that we were predestined and foreordained to tell other people how to live, that this was our call, our peculiar duty. If this is a feeling that we honestly have within ourselves, then it is especially wise that we go down and sit in a corner somewhere and think it through. In fact, it might be very well for us to sit in that corner facing the corner and more or less soak this out. The person who has this tremendous drive of being the infallible guardian of family, community, and nation should do a lot of very wise remembering. He should try to see what his advice has led to when it was followed. To try to discover what this long-range pressure that he has been forcing upon others, what it has done to them. What has it done to himself? How many homes has the person that is always right already broken? What condition has arisen around him as a result of this eternal rightness of his own? And in order to clear the deck for this type of mentation, it is very wise to get out of the fact or out of the idea that martyrdom for such people is a virtue. The individual who is always right, and of course always in trouble, is inclined to become a martyr. He feels that he has been unappreciated, that his great powers have not been recognized, and that everyone left him because they were too small to understand him. It must be a nice way to feel if you can make it, but it doesn't last very long. After a great deal of martyrdom, the martyr may realize that all he has actually achieved is isolation. He is alone because no one else can get along with him. He is alone because he has offended everyone. This fact that he is alone, that he has been the victim of some pretty bitter remarks himself from people whose lives he meddled with, this type of causation leads him to feel that he was born to be misunderstood, and that like all the saints and martyrs that have gone before, he is suffering for his wisdom. He is not. He is suffering from his forthright stupidity. And no type of wisdom which has not kindness, thoughtfulness in it, is going to get very far. I told this to a man once. We said, what more kindness can you have than to force people to do what is right? It involves little problems. In other words, if they need a thorough beating, the kindest thing in the world is to give it to them. But the individual has been the one who decided whether they needed it or not. And from experience, I would judge from this particular person that he thought everybody needed it except himself. So this type of attitude leads only to personal disaster. Whatever we do in this world, we have to do with a great deal of kindness and patience. And anyone looking back over a life and seeing only martyrdom has got a lot of big mistakes in himself. Certainly, he can honestly say things have not always been as he wished they were. There have been many things that to him were unkindnesses that perhaps he will never understand. but it is almost certain that he never tried to understand. All he really wanted to prove was that the other person was hurting him and he did not deserve it. So this whole situation breaks down to enlarging the internal power to think things through. We come back to the essential fact that we face all the time, that the person must make basic allegiances to ideas, to ideals that are big enough to put the universe in which he lives in order. If he does not believe in God or nature or the universe or natural laws or any reasonable reason for anything, then perhaps we can justify him a little bit in making a mess out of his own life. And if he has no beliefs, he will make a mess out of his own life. For every life must have a belief in a good greater than evil. Must have a belief that the individual is here to grow and to cooperate with life, not to stand against it and oppose it. He is here to understand, instead of constantly demanding that other people understand him. So to avoid irritations, you have to have within yourself the capacity to accept things, more or less as clinical material, rather than as personal affront. When someone says something to you, instead of rising in righteous wrath to call them a liar, it is better to keep quiet and ask yourself very quietly, is it possible they are telling the truth? This is what we don't like to do. We want to defend. And if it finally proves that they were telling the truth, we still have another out. The life we have lived, our homes, our families, our business, all these things are responsible for the fact that we didn't see the truth. Always it's something else. Never the fact that actually we had built a temperament which was truth resistant. If we have such a temperament, we must remove it. And nature will help us. It will guide us. It will show us the way. All we have to do is to use the faculties with which we have been endowed and use them honestly. Honesty means to be able to sit down and analyze your own life. And say, yes, I guess perhaps I am a little impatient or a little unfair. Actually, I don't feel very good a good deal of the time. And when people do not feel good, it is easy to feel bad. Also, it is easy to be nervous when I've always been nervous all my life. So we begin to see why we have these attitudes. But then we first of all begin to realize that nervousness is an amoral thing. It has no morality to it. Nervousness, like biliousness, has none of the structure of active acceptances or rejections. It is a sickness afflicting points of view. If we have something like this in us, let us recognize it. Let us realize that it was not our temperament or our upbringing that was necessarily to blame. It was what Samuel Johnson called a small amount of green bile in the liver. This is what has caused it. This can be corrected. It is a matter of finding out the cause. Why we are not pleasant, accepting, charitable, gracious, generous people. When we found out the cause of it, remedy it. Never try to defend our right to be unpleasant. There is no right. We cannot prevent other people being unpleasant if they feel like it. but we do not, by any divine edict, find it necessary to copy them. We do not find it necessary to be like them because there are a good many of them. We have always the distinct right to build our own lives, and it is most important that we do, not only here but hereafter. We are living in an eternal citizenship, and if we allow other people to disturb us, they are injuring our destiny as well as the moment. If for any reason we disturb them, we are injuring their destiny, not now, but for all time. Let us then settle down quietly to the problem of becoming non-injurious, that we will not injure, and we will not permit what other people say or think to injure us. We shall simply recognize, if we can, if there's any possible way of assuming that they meant well, we will assume that, for our sake as well as theirs. Remember that when we give good motives to other people, we are not only being kind to them, but we are most of all being kind to ourselves. For the moment a good motive arises in our consciousness, we are protecting health and happiness. If there is simply no way in which we can attribute a good motive to these people, or to the circumstances that have arisen, then we simply relax. We do not accept wrong instruction. We do not fail to see where we think the truth lies. We are not gullible, but we are quiet. And we will instinctively, if it is possible, work out some subtle little conspiracy of kindness in which we will try to help these other persons without at any moment or for any reason preaching to them or dogmatizing. Perhaps we can find ways to create bridges of sympathy through which we can assist another person. And to assist one person to take one step forward is more valuable to us and the universe and our happiness and our soul than finding out what is correctly wrong with 10,000 people. To criticize adds very little, but to understand and try to build, working with people in trouble, to try to help them without offending them, but simply doing it not because we want to convert them to something, but because our heart tells us they are human also, and that out of our common humanity must sometime come the brotherhood of man. So it is much better, if we must err at all, to err in charity, to be more kindly, more gracious than necessary. For in so doing, we enrich our own psychic content. We are all trying to find truth. We are all trying to live nearer to wisdom. And that can well start with most persons through charity. And by charitas, which is love, we do not hate people even when they are wrong. Rather, we develop this instinct of compassion. Our first instinct is to be sorry. And instead of rising up in wrath against our adversary, we become aware of how he must hurt inside. How the very things that he does reveal a strange psychic pain in him. Though it may sometimes be very difficult to do this, especially where it seems as though tyranny is abroad in the world. But this tyranny, whatever it may be, originates in little people who hurt in themselves, and then swing out viciously to try and find some relief from pain by hurting others. It is a vicious and terrible cycle. Most of us will never be faced with any of the massive expressions of it. We will never be in a position where we will be personally singled out for great tyranny. But we will be personally involved in situations that can lead to tragic little tyrannies. And it is always best to keep in mind that wisdom finds ways to keep the peace. If we can do this, we will grow. And in a way, we will help others to grow. Because actually, if we encourage another person to be continuously more angry by arguing with him, we hurt him more and more. Nothing is solved. If we can get one instinct down inside, that when something unpleasant happens, our first instinct is to defend the other person and not ourselves, it will give us this little breather. Give us time to examine it more carefully, consider the situation more thoroughly, and perhaps come to a wiser decision ultimately. But in that first moment where we have impact of that which we disagree with, if our first thought can be, perhaps the other person is right, we have saved our own health, our own happiness. And we have also indicated that we were open enough in consciousness to consider this thing which we might otherwise reject empirically. So beginning with this effort to relax and get away from irritation, if we can combine this possibility of the other person being right with a kind of quiet, gentle, constructive sense of humor, in which it is perfectly possible for us to know when the joke is on us. But it is perfectly possible for us to laugh off things which others take with deep and terrible resentments. We can get along much wiser, much happier, with a little good sense of humor which does enable us to recognize our own faults and realize how ridiculous we can appear at certain times. We can lose some of this egotism, relaxing these pressures, relaxing these intensities. We come head on into a circumstance which involves perhaps other persons. We can try for a moment to put ourselves as far as we can into the other person's place, in the sense not of what we would do in his place, but what is the reason for what he is doing. If his own background, his own life, his own securities have been such that he is a child, that he has not matured, that he is not able to evaluate these things correctly, then there is absolutely no use in becoming angry at him. Our first thought should be to try to find some way to bring the truth to him in a way that he can accept it. And to do this, we must learn his level of acceptances. We cannot demand that he accepts ours. But problems then become little games, little ways of trying to find out how God might act and must act in a creation, much of which does not know that deity exists, and the rest of creation thinks they can run it better than he does. And under these conditions, infinite patience, infinite quietude, infinite insight, eternal understanding of the weaknesses of creations, these are the weapons, the instruments by which things can be preserved. And we can use them in a small way every day in our own lives. If we really understand, we will not be irritated. And if we find that we are irritated, let us take that as a symptom of the immediate need for greater understanding. If we will accept this challenge, I think things will go a little better. Thank you very much.